about 10 years ago at Citizens Advice Brent. And yeah, so I'll be talking to you now about benefits that might be relevant for private renters. So I'm just going to share my slides and do that. That can work. Okay, can everyone see that? So the benefits I'm going to talk about are universal credit, housing benefit, also going to talk about local housing allowance and the benefit cap and discretionary housing payment, then another benefit, council tax support and pension credit, and then have a quick look at other ways to save money and some useful resources. So to start with, a lot of you have probably heard of universal credit and the fact that it is replacing 6 working age benefits. And those benefits that it's replacing are income-based job seekers allowance, income-related employment and support allowance, housing benefit with some exceptions, income support and child tax credit and working tax credit. So if you're not claiming any of those benefits at the moment, then you don't need to worry in terms of whether you can apply for universal credit. But if you are claiming any of those benefits, and you apply for universal credit, it's important to note that those benefits will stop and you will never be able to claim them again, even crucially if your universal credit claim is unsuccessful. So as I say, if you're not claiming any benefits at all, then there's no risk in that sense of claiming universal credit. But if you are, then I would advise you to seek advice from a benefits advisor first before claiming it. So now what is universal credit? So it basically, if you're working age and you're on a low income, you may be able to claim universal credit to help pay your rent and your living costs. You can't claim it if your savings are over 16,000. And you can apply online on the gov.uk website. If you have difficulties claiming online, that you don't have much access to the internet, then you can make a telephone claim by calling the helpline, but you'd have to explain that you weren't able to apply or manage your claim online. And if you need help with the form, you can contact the Citizens Advice Service Help to Claim, and that's the telephone number for that service. And the point of that service is to help people get their first payment of universal credit paid to them. And they can do things like benefit calculations for you as well to work out how much you might be able to get. And if you do want to find out how much universal credit you might be entitled to, then at the end of this presentation, I've got a link to online benefit calculators, which you can use to work out how much you might be able to get. So just a bit on housing benefit. Again, this has been largely replaced by universal credit for most working age people, but you might already be claiming it, or you might be one of those exceptions that I'll talk about in a minute. So just that you know, it is a benefit for people who are on low income and need help with their rent. You might be able to get all your rent paid or just some of it, depending on where you live, who you live with, your income and savings. And that's also true for universal credit. You must have savings again of less than £16,000 if you're working age. So the exceptions where people can claim housing benefit is mainly if you've reached state pension age, but do check the rules if your partner is below state pension age, because if you're a mixed age couple, you might have to claim universal credit. And then also if you're in supported, sheltered or temporary housing, then you would claim housing benefit for your rent instead of universal credit. And again, you can find out some more details on that on the gov.uk website. So local housing allowance basically is set by the government that caps the amount of housing benefit or universal credit housing element private renters can get. So that's how much it's going to pay you for your rent. So the amount that you're entitled to, the cap level that you're entitled to, depends on your age and how many people are in your household. So I've put a couple of links in there for how you can check the local housing allowance rates for your area, and also how many bedrooms you would be eligible for based on the number of people in your household. So if you're thinking of moving somewhere and you want to know how much you'd get from universal credit housing element, for example, you can first of all work out how many bedrooms you'd be eligible for by using that calculator, and then use the other calculator and put in your postcode to find out the maximum you'd be able to get. So as well as the caps on absolute rent levels, depending on your local area and household composition, so how many bedrooms you'd be entitled to, there is also a limit that you might have heard of called the benefit cap, which limits the total amount of benefits that working age people can get if they're not working enough. So it mainly affects people who are not working or who are working very limited hours. There is a grace period if you've been working for the last 12 months, earning more than £604 a month. And it affects people getting benefits like universal credit, employment and support allowance, job seekers allowance, if those two are both income related, income support, housing benefit, child tax credit, and child benefit. And again, there's a link there for how you can find out the benefit cap amount for your area. Basically, there's a slightly different one if you live in London compared to if you live outside of London. So if you are affected by the benefit cap, you can become exempt from it by working enough hours to get working tax credit, if that's relevant, or claiming universal credit and earning £617 or more a month. You can also avoid it and be exempt from it if you qualify for a disability, sickness or carers benefit, such as personal independence payment, disability living allowance, carers allowance, or the support component of employment and support allowance, or the LCWRA element of universal credit, which is just a sickness element. So if you can't make yourself exempt from the benefit cap, then the two things you could look at to kind of mitigate it would be moving to cheaper accommodation if possible, or again, trying to negotiate a rent reduction if possible with your landlord. But you could also try and apply for a discretionary housing payment. And obviously, these two bullet points are also relevant for if you can't afford the local housing, if you can't afford your rent because it's capped due to the local housing allowance. So what is discretionary housing payment? It is a short-term payment from the local council to help you pay your rent. And you can apply if you're receiving housing benefit or the housing element of universal credit, and that doesn't cover your full rent. So each council does have a limited fund and its own policy. There's no guarantee you'll get it if you apply for it, but generally they prioritise people affected by local housing allowance caps, the benefit cap, and bedroom tax and occupancy, which is social housing only. The council can also award a DHP to people who need deposits or rent in advance when they move home. Again, it's not guaranteed, but you can apply for it. You need to check your local council website to find out how to apply. And you can challenge a discretionary housing payment decision you're unhappy with by requesting a revision. And this guidance that I've put here is quite helpful, particularly if you're trying to challenge a discretionary housing payment decision, because it's got some kind of case studies of people that the government thinks should be getting discretionary housing payments. So you might be able to use examples from that to show the council that you should be entitled according to what the government intended. It's usually a short-term payment and then you can reapply, but generally it's intended to be short-term. So some of you might have to pay council tax depending on the type of property that you're in. If you do and you're on a low income, then you may be entitled to council tax reduction to reduce your council tax bill. Each local council has a different scheme. So some people might have, even if they're on a low income, might have to pay more in certain areas than others. And you won't normally be able to claim it if your savings are over 16,000. And that link on gov.uk will just link you to your local council's council tax reduction claim page. So I just wanted to talk a bit about pension credit. So for people who are over state pension age, you can't claim universal credit, and they would claim pension credit instead if they're on a low income. And so if you are on a low income and you get guaranteed pension credit, then you'll also qualify for other benefits such as housing benefit, council tax reduction, cold weather payments, and help with the costs of NHS services. And you can apply online, by phone or post, and that link tells you more about pension credit. So now just a little bit on other financial support and ways to save money. So depending on your circumstances, it might be worth checking whether you can be furloughed or get a self-employed grant. SEISS, so you can look on gov.uk for more information about those. You might also, if you need to buy something, you might be able to get second-hand items for free by using freecycle.org. You might be entitled to a grant, particularly if you need to make a one-off purchase. So if you go to turntous.org.uk, they've got a list of grants, and you can put in your details and see if you might be entitled to something there. And obviously, we've got a talk later from Octopus Energy that will talk more about energy, but some energy providers have got energy grants to help you pay off energy debt. Another way to kind of reduce your outgoings is to see if you can get a better deal for your energy and phone bills. And it is worth checking this quite frequently, so every 6 months or every year, to see if there is a better deal you can get. And you could also consider making a weekly or monthly budget just to see, what's coming in and what's going out, and for example, whether there's any direct debits you're paying out for things that you don't actually need anymore. So just some links to help with some of the things I've talked about. So there's a link at the beginning to online benefits calculators if you want to work out if you're entitled to universal credit. A lot of them also can tell you how much council tax support you might be able to get as well. If you would like face-to-face advice on benefits or housing or debt or other areas, then you can contact your local citizens advice, and you can also look at the advice pages, which are quite extensive in those areas. And then you can also look at the government benefits pages using that link. And then National Debtline and Citizens Advice have both got a budgeting tool, which you might find useful. And you can also call National Debtline or use their web chat to ask about debt advice. And then there's lots of websites to help you find the best deal for your bills, but one of them is moneysavingexpert.com. Okay, so that's the end of my presentation, and you're happy to take questions a bit later.
Thank you very much, Bez. That was really fascinating. I hope that was useful. We had a question that came up in the chat, just pointing out that the benefit system is broadly applies to the UK as a whole. So universal credit and housing benefit are all sort of done through DWP, which is UK wide. But we also have discretionary housing payments, which have different systems in England compared to Wales and Scotland. I should say that Renters' Rights Awareness Week is focused on England. Most of our events will be England only, but a lot of the this advice does apply to Wales and Scotland. Bez, can you just mention any issues that might be different in the devolved nations?
Yeah, so I'd probably have to just double check on things like discretionary housing payment, and you'd have to check the local council. So universal credit is across the nations. Council tax support, definitely England. Discretionary housing payment, definitely England. So yeah, it's probably best to just double check. But yeah, universal credit housing benefit, England, Wales and Scotland, but not Northern Ireland. And Northern Ireland's also different on council tax. But yes, I'd have to double check the others, but definitely England.
Thanks, Bez. And next we've got Lil, who can talk us through energy.
Lovely, thanks, Dan. Hi, everyone. My name's Lil Murdoch. I'm from Octopus Energy, and I've been working in the energy sector for around 6 years. So I'm just going to share my slides. Bear with me. Hopefully you can all see that. Yes. Okay, so I just want to briefly talk you through about energy tariffs, meters, and the sort of energy savers advice. So can you switch to a better deal? The answer is yes. So if you are directly responsible for paying for your energy bills, then you can look around for a best deal. You can go through Uswitch, different money saving supermarkets, and do search for the best deal. But I just wanted to highlight a couple of things that maybe people haven't considered. So don't always go for the first cheapest deal. That would be my first thought. Do shop around, and a couple of things to consider. Exit fees. So when you embark on a new energy tariff, sometimes there are exit fees where you're tied in for a period of time, sometimes 12 months, 24 months. And if halfway through that particular tariff you feel that you want to change to a cheaper deal, then it may cost you greatly to actually come out of that deal. So you probably wouldn't benefit from moving to the cheaper tariff, because you'd obviously have to pay the exit fees that could actually equate to the savings you're after. Customer service reviews are really important. So yes, there's some great deals out there, but you also need to make sure that you get the best service. So when you do need to reach out to your energy supplier for support, you need to make sure the customer service is there and it matches what you're paying for. So do have a look on Trustpilot. If you do find a deal that is really good, then have a look at that particular energy supplier, have a look at their Trustpilot rating, make sure they've got all the relevant channels for you to contact them, that they're open to multiple channels, that you can contact them through phone, email, or through social media, to make sure that obviously they can deliver the service that and the contact that you prefer. Now, warm home discount scheme, I know Bez was talking there about benefits, but the majority of suppliers will actually offer what's called the warm home discount scheme, which is £140 that you can receive towards your energy. That's normally open around August, September time of each year and runs to the 31st of March of the following year. There are two schemes. There is one that's called the Core scheme. And as Bez alluded to, any consumers that are actually eligible for the guaranteed element of pension credit, they will automatically be awarded the £140 warm home discount through the Department of Work and Pensions. But they also run another scheme called the Broader scheme, which is an application only scheme. So if you are on a low income, or if you're on means tested benefits, then the warm home discount scheme, you can apply for that. Not all energy suppliers do offer this scheme. It isn't mandatory for any energy supplier that has less than 150,000 customers. So again, when you're looking for that cheap deal, do go onto their website and make sure they offer this, because if you are eligible under the criteria, you don't want to miss out on £140 towards the winter cost of your bills. And then some energy suppliers offer referral fees. So when you're actually joined an energy supplier, if you refer a friend or a family member, you may get a cashback that's applied to your energy account. So the more people you refer to that energy supplier, then obviously the more referral fees you will get on your energy account. So it just helps you build up that credit, especially around the winter time. Now, one thing that's really key is that when it talks about a fixed deal, that means that the unit prices of your tariff is fixed. It doesn't mean that your energy is fixed. So the unit price per kilowatt will be fixed if you enter a fixed deal. But if you use a lot of energy, then you'll be paying more for it. And I'll talk about some savings tips shortly. The other thing you can do as well from a private rental is that you can actually change your meter. So obviously have open dialogue with your landlord, but you don't need permission. You can change your meter. So you can change from a prepayment meter to a credit meter and vice versa. Now, the UK rollout of smart meters is underway, and smart meters may obviously help you reduce energy in the long term. They're ideal because they automatically send through meter readings to your energy supplier. So if you haven't got a smart meter and you forget to send meter readings for a couple of months, then the bill that you will receive will be based on estimated readings, which means you could be overestimated or underestimated for your usage, which means you could end up with a higher bill than you expected when your actual meter readings come through. So it's always an idea every month, make sure you take your meter readings and you send them to your energy supplier. And if you've just moved into rented accommodation, that's the first thing you should be doing, taking your gas and your electricity meter readings, and make sure the energy supplier who provides that property has your readings on the day you moved in. So you will only be liable from that point. And then prepayment meters, again, it helps you keep control of what you're spending, but it does come at a cost. The standing charge for prepayment meters can be a lot higher than the traditional or the smart meters. So energy efficiency, the big tip here is when it's not in use, turn it off. I think we're all guilty of that. We go upstairs at night, you leave everything on standby, and because it's not on, you think you're not using it, but eventually over that year, it's going to be ticking along and ticking along. So again, if it's not in use, then turn it off. Obviously no fridge or freezers, leave those on please, but take and plug your TV. Turn off your kettle and plug your kettle. It's all a little bit over a year. It will save you some pounds. In terms of light bulbs, LED light bulbs, they can save between 25 to 80% of energy over the course of the year, again, helping you save pounds. In terms of your thermostat, so they recommend between 18 to 21 degrees during the winter. If you can try and just nudge that down 1 degree, again, that will just help you, just slightly reducing those costs over an annual energy bill. In terms of your washing machine, don't turn it on for a half load. Always make sure it's a full load and try and wash everything at 30 degrees. It will wash beautifully by reducing it from 40 to 30. Again, it's just a couple of changes just to help you save some of those pounds. Now, another thing to consider, as a private renter, if you are on benefits and eligible for benefits, then potentially you could benefit from the ECO scheme, which is the energy obligation scheme. There is plenty of information on the Ofgem website if you want to have a look at this. But basically, for a property to be rented, it should have an energy performance certificate, and the energy rating should be higher than an E, from A to E, for that property to be rented. But if you haven't got loft insulation, if you haven't got cavity wall insulation, it's great. You can do all these tweaks to try and reduce your energy bills, but you could have heat going out the walls and going out the ceiling. So again, if you haven't got these measures in place and you are on benefits, you potentially may be able to have some energy efficiency measures installed into the property. And just talk to your landlord and explain that you want to pursue this. It's always good to keep the dialogue open with your landlord. But again, there is solid wall insulation. There's loads of different measures you can do to try and make your home more energy efficient, so the heat that you are using stays in the property and doesn't seep out the walls and the roof. Now, there is a link there for more energy savings tips, and I'll put that into the chat panel shortly. And then finally, what to do if you're experiencing financial difficulties. I think first and foremost, you really do need to reach out to your energy supplier. If you've got any difficulties whatsoever, if you're unable to pay next month's direct debit, if you're unable to pay a bill, it's always best to be open and transparent. And that's what we want as an energy supplier. We want to be able to build that relationship with all of our customers. If we don't know you have a problem, then yes, of course, letters will be sent out. The energy industry will see that if someone has gone very quiet and just not paying a bill, then there are standard letters that will come out, which will probably just add to the stress and anxiety that you may be feeling if you're going through a difficult time. So all I'd say is please pick up the phone or email or use social media through DM and PM to actually contact your energy supplier to say that you're going through a difficult time, explain some of the situations so they can put the right support in place for you. If you are able to pay for your usage on a monthly basis, but you've built up a debt in the past, again, talk to your energy supplier. They will be able to support you with either a payment holiday or put a payment plan in place. And again, affordability is really key. If you're aware of how much you can actually spend, if you can complete an income and expenditure form for your energy supplier, and it identifies you can only pay £5 towards your energy debt, then that's £5 towards your debt. They're not going to make you pay £50 towards a debt. Be open and honest with them, and they will set affordable plans to help and support you. Now, there is holistic support with other organisations, just a couple to name there, but there's so many organisations where you can reach out and they can do holistic debt. So if you've got financial difficulties with water or energy or creditors from other organisations, they can take a full overview holistic debt of your situation and put payment plans in place that are affordable to you to remove the stress and anxiety. And then recently in May this year, Breathing Space has actually been launched in England and Wales. It's a new government launch scheme whereby if consumers do find themselves in debt with many creditors, when you're getting emails or letters through the post, it can just exacerbate that worry and anxiousness. So when you reach out to a debt advisory service, they will see if you're eligible and you meet the criteria for breathing space. And it does exactly what it's called. It gives you that breathing space for a 60-day period. So for example, with an energy supplier, you would still be expected to pay for your usage, your ongoing usage. But if there's any debt that has built up, then there'll be no chasing, there'll be no phone calls, no emails, no letters. Once you have breathing space against that creditor, they cannot contact you for those 60 days. And in that time, it gives you that headspace to talk to the debt advice service, to try and put a payment plan in place and be able to put you back on the straight and narrow. So that's something that's only just recently been launched. And that's everything from me, Dan.
Great, thank you very much, Lil. I was wondering if there's, with you were talking about turning things off standby and unplugging things. Is that something that a smart meter can kind of show you, like what difference that makes? I mean, it strikes me that's one of the benefits of a smart meter.
Yes, over time it will. So with smart meter, when that's installed, you're also provided with a smart in-home display unit. And what that smart in-house display unit will actually tell you how much energy you're using. So over time, if you, for example, for a whole week left everything on standby, it will tell you how much you've used in that day for electricity. And then the next week you switch everything off and unplug everything, you should be able to see that slightly going down. And then over the whole year, the annualized cost should be slightly lower. It's just about changing behaviors. So when you walk out of a room and you leave a light on, there's no one in that room, you don't need the light on, turn it off. It's just changing some behaviors that will actually then support with a reduction in those energy bills.
Okay, thanks. Right.
Okay.
So mine is on rent rises. I will share my screen now and get started. Hopefully you can see that. Oh, great. My screen is frozen. There we are. So one of the things to remember if your landlord does want a higher rent is that it's ultimately, if they just phone you up or email you out of the blue saying I want a higher rent, you should be aware that it is not a done deal. You do have options. Either you can negotiate with your landlord, or if you can't agree, they may then start a process which you can challenge at a tribunal. So this is these slides will take you through those options. One thing though, the perennial problem with prior renting, and it relates to rent rises, and it relates to switching energy supplier. Whatever you want to do, the landlord will usually be able to ask you to leave without needing a reason, and through the Section 21 of the Housing Act, which basically allows landlords to use no-fault evictions. So that's just something to bear in mind whenever you're faced with something like this. So when your landlord can raise the rent is when you agree to it. And so that can be in a number of ways. You could have signed a long-term contract, or an effectively a long-term contract when you first moved in, which allowed the landlord to raise the rent by a certain amount each year with what is called a rent review clause. You can also agree to it when you sign a new fixed term contract, so when you renew the tenancy. And then even if you don't sign anything new, I mean, it doesn't need to be a new tenancy agreement. It could be just a agreement on an email to pay a new rent. But once you start paying a new rent, then that is considered to be you agreeing to that new rent. The other thing that the landlord can do if you don't agree that the rent should go up is by serving what's called a Section 13 notice. And they can do this once a year outside a fixed term. So if you're on a rolling contract, then this is something they can do, but that's what you can challenge at a tribunal. And then your landlord can also raise the rent when you move out. So if they if they really want a higher rent, they could serve a Section 21 notice. You would have to move out if it's valid, and so then they can charge the new tenant a higher rent. What's really, I mean, basically as soon as you get a sniff of the landlord wanting a higher rent, you should think about your bargaining position. One thing to bear in mind sort of straight away is that moving out is your biggest bargaining chip, essentially. It does depend on a few things though. Have you been a reliable tenant? So if you have been, you've paid the rent on time every month, then the landlord will be putting a lot at risk by trying to find a new tenant if you do move out. Could you afford the new rent is another question to ask. If you will struggle to pay the rent, then there's a risk you could go into arrears, and regardless of what that could do to the chance of being evicted, it would make life harder for your landlord. On the other hand, if you can't afford to move out very easily, then that kind of makes your position a bit more difficult. If you can afford to move out, if you're able to raise a deposit for a new flat, then that does give you a bit of extra negotiating power. The big key thing to know about is what local rents are like. If the landlord wants a rent that is higher than what similar properties are being advertised for locally, then they'll struggle to relet the property if you move out. But if what they're offering is lower than the prevailing market rent, then that puts you in a tougher position, because it means that you have fewer options. It might be more affordable to stay put. If there are problems with the property, so if the if you've got a dicky boiler or a problem with damp, then that makes it possible. It's possible that they would find it difficult to relet the property with the rent that they're asking for. You should also, I think in a lot of cases, it's the letting agent who requests the sort of ridiculously high rent. This happened to me. The letting agents said the landlord wants to raise the rent by 10%, and which was higher than what the market was doing. So we went to the landlord, and the landlord said, "Oh, that's what the letting agent advised me. I'll raise it by a lower amount." And it's really it's more in the letting agent's interest to raise the rent, because that means they get a higher commission. If the property gets relet, that means that there's more fees for them. For the landlord, it's actually much more, generally speaking, it's more beneficial to keep tenants in place. And then the other thing is to think about, if you can afford a higher rent, are you going to get anything in return? Are you going to get a better service from your landlord? Is he going to improve the property? That's something to bear in mind. So you need to think of all of these things, and then decide on how to respond to the landlord. Set out a case why the rent shouldn't go up. The landlord then could turn around you should hopefully have a conversation with him, sets things out in an email, and then he could come back to you and say, okay, I won't raise by as much. Here's what I'm willing to do, or how, what you offer me a higher rent, which can be quite tricky to gauge, but that's normally better. It means you've got a result, especially if it's something that's more easy to afford. They'll probably want to sign a new tenancy just to lock that in. If you don't agree, then the landlord could serve a section 13 notice, and that can be challenged at a tribunal. But then they can also serve, instead, they could serve a section 21 because they think, oh, I can, this tenant, I'm just not going to make as much money from them. I think I could get a much higher rent from someone else. So that's what their thinking is there. But it is worth remembering that if you do get section 21, there are a number of ways it could be invalid. So it's always worth checking. So they're all listed here. I'm not going to go through them. The first tier tribunal is the property chamber, and it's interesting in that all of the decisions are published online. That includes in Scotland and Wales. They have the equivalent there. They have a similar tribunal system. So you can do look at local cases that happen local to you, or more recently. They haven't. The thing to bear in mind is that there haven't been that many of them because the tribunal is not very well known about, and also particularly in England and Wales, because of the existence of no-fault evictions, it can be difficult to use this because a landlord can serve a section 13 and a section 21, and it kind of puts you at a disadvantage. The tribunal will make a decision based on market rents, but crucially, if your home is not as good as a decent property out in the market, then they may well award the landlord a lower rent than what's going in the market. And then one of the cruel things about this is that the tribunal could award a higher rent than what the landlord asks for. So it is kind of you're taking a gamble by challenging it at a tribunal. And it's also worth noting that it gets backdated, that if a new rent gets backdated, so that so you may have to put money aside, or though it is possible to plead financial difficulties, and it is also possible to appeal, and you might get support that way. So that is it for the presentations. So I switched effortlessly into sharing mode. I will. I'm going to take a look at the Q&A and see if there's any questions that we can answer. We've got a question from Alan, who asks about negotiating a rent reduction, which is a good question, because I mean it's something that's come up quite a lot in the last year or so, because of COVID and people having lost income and being unable to afford the rent that they got at the start of their tenancy. I think a lot of it. Let me see. Sorry, the screen shares. I think we could probably drop out of screen share at the moment. Yeah. So Bez may be able to add to this, but negotiating rent reduction with your landlords, a lot of it depends on your landlord's attitude, whether they're sympathetic to you and your situation. It is a lottery, essentially, the current private rental market, and similar principles apply. Have you been a reliable tenant? Just affording the rent means that you want to make sure that you're not stressed. The landlord should want to make sure that you're not stressing about being able to pay the rent, but at the same time they will have their own costs and may push back against any reduction. But Bez, in your experience, are there any tips that you would have for people negotiating a reduction?
I mean, so yeah, I've mainly been doing benefits advice for the last few years. I mean, in terms of affording the rent, obviously you could check to see if you could claim any other benefits, including discretionary housing payment to top that up. But I think just from my previous experience, I think it can just depend on the relationship with the landlord as to kind of how successful you're likely to be. But it's always good to get housing advice on it as well.
Thanks. Yeah. A question, I suppose there's a question here. What do I do if my benefit payment doesn't cover the rent? And that's essentially where discretionary housing payments come in, but also other grants. And I suppose for both of those, one question that occurs to me is there a particular approach that improves your chances of getting one of these payments? For example, does it help to demonstrate that you've been through a budgeting process and that sort of thing?
Yeah, so I mean, each council have its own discretionary housing payment form. So the ones I've seen all do have like some form of budget, which can be a bit annoying if it's different to the one you've got, if you've done a different one. Say if you're getting debt advice, you might have a different type of financial statement. But if you have that, you could attach that to the discretionary housing payment application. But the key thing to demonstrate is that you are suffering financial hardship, but also mention any characteristics that might mean that you're more vulnerable. So if you have got a health condition, or if you're a carer, or if you've got a relative or child who's, say, disabled, or someone's mentioned domestic violence, so anything that might make you more vulnerable, that might mean that they're more likely to pay attention to your case. But also it is usually short term, so it's quite good to flag if your situation is short term. So for example, if you're out of work at the moment due to lockdown, but you're confident that in a few months you're much more likely to get a job, then that would be a short-term reason to apply for discretionary housing payment. Or similarly, if you have a health condition and you've just applied for personal independence payment, then you could say, well, maybe once you get personal independence payment, you might have some more money. So, anything that means that in future your situation might be different, it's good to flag that. And also, if you do get turned down, I would always suggest challenging that decision, to asking for a revision, and trying to use that guidance I put in my slides earlier to kind of quote anything, and also looking at the council's own policy and just trying to quote it back at them to demonstrate why they should be paying you. And if they don't, after you've done a revision, then you could write a complaint and say, look, according to your council's policy, this is, what these are the kinds of people you should award it to, and I've demonstrated how I am one of those people. So, I think that the decision was wrong. So there's kind of extra steps you can take as well.
Thank you. Just sticking with you, Bez, if that's all right. There's this question about from Janet, which is, what about people fleeing domestic violence? She says upper ceiling removed for age by David Cameron in 2010. Now I don't know if that's linked, because is there anything you
I'm not sure. I think Janet had the hand up, so I don't know if Janet wanted to expand on that at all, just because I wasn't quite sure what that was referring to.
If Janet's available, could we get her on? Janet, are you able to ask your question?
Don't know. Someone needs to unmute or give Janet permission to.
Hello.
Hi, Janet.
Hi. Sorry. My question was for women or men who are fleeing domestic violence, and what rights they would have in terms of having children or not having children, remaining at the property or not remaining at the property, as well as the upper ceiling on age. because David Cameron did remove the upper ceiling on age for people to work as long as they wanted to back in 2010.
I'm not sure what upper ceiling you're referring to there, but I can talk about.
As I said, the upper ceiling on age so that you can work.
Okay, and just in general. Yeah, I mean, the sort of benefits for people who are over state pension age, that is just linked to your state pension age. So you can be working and claim state pension at the same time. In terms of, yes, in terms of domestic violence, that's quite a big question because obviously there's lots of different aspects to that. So as you mentioned, housing benefits, other rights you might have. So, you know, initially, if someone is affected by domestic violence, then there's a number of helplines they could call for kind of immediate help and advice. But in terms of sort of benefits, depends on the benefit. But so Universal Credit has got something in place, for example, that says they can temporarily remove the need for you to look for work if you're a victim of domestic violence, so you can focus on your immediate needs.
How long is that temporarily for?
I believe that it's 6 months, then it can be extended, but I would have to double check to check that. But if you've got someone in that situation, I would suggest that they do speak to a benefits advisor because the law also does change. And there's also something, so I mean, I'll post this in the chat if that's helpful, which has got links in it. But sometimes they can help you get housing element for 2 properties. So that could help if you're kind of temporarily away from your former home. And obviously you can make a new claim for Universal Credit if you are splitting from a partner, and then that would just be in your name. You would be the person accessing the funds. Sometimes a split payment so that you're getting half the money could be relevant, but it all kind of depends on the circumstances. So I would suggest that you can get advice. And
it could be disputed. It depends whose name the property's in, surely.
I mean, as I say, individual clients is going to be slightly different. I would also just say, if they are a single parent, then they could talk to Gingerbread, the single parent charity, who've got really good advice on domestic violence, how that affects your housing rights, and how that affects your benefits.
Sure.
Okay. Thanks. Thanks, Janet. Let's move on. There's a question here for Lil. Is there any support, finance, or incentive for a landlord to improve the energy efficiency of their property that a tenant could point them to? And you mentioned the ecosystem. Is that the main one at the moment?
It is, yes. So really, with rental properties, a landlord cannot rent a property out if their energy performance certificate, if the energy rating is less than E. So, for example, if they had an energy performance certificate and it was an F, they would need to do whatever measures they need to improve the efficiency of that property to improve it to an E or above. There's no financial gain or incentives for a landlord other than the fact that if they cannot improve the efficiency of their property and it's below an E, then they won't be able to rent. So the incentive is to actually make sure the house is energy efficient, or else it will be a non-rentable property under the new guidelines. So I saw there was another question. Was it a similar one?
There was another question. There's a couple of questions about whether the landlord can stipulate in the contract whether you can switch energy supplier.
Okay. Yes. Okay. So in terms of switching supplier, it's always best to check your contract and just double check nothing has been stipulated. Some landlords actually already have deals with the energy supplier and they want to maintain that energy supplier. So if that clause is in your contract, do check with your landlord before you do consider switching. But the rule of thumb is if you pay and you're responsible for the bills for your energy and it's not pulled together in your rent, hence the landlord pays the rent and the energy themselves. But if you pay your energy directly to a supplier, then you should be able, without having to let the landlord know, that you can switch supplier. But again, you can always just mention it to your landlord. It's always good to have open dialogue. But as long as there's nothing stipulated in your tenancy agreement, you should be able to change supplier and they cannot refuse that.
Yeah, I think there does seem to be a landlords will try and get away with putting that in the contract, but I think when it's worth bearing in mind if you do want to switch supplier and your landlord's prohibited that, they can't be aware of the Section 21 option that the landlord has. Someone did ask about the what makes a Section 21 invalid, and we will actually send an email out after this, and I'll include a link in there to that list, which we have on our website. We did have a question about, we've got a couple of minutes left of questions. We have a question about someone who has been trying to negotiate their rent, and they're in a block of flats, and the other flats there are in better condition than the questioners. How do they speak to their landlord and try to convince them not to raise the rent by so much? I'm hoping that the presentation earlier helped answer that question. Essentially, if you see properties being advertised and they're a similar type of property, but they're in much better condition than yours, then it's worth sort of taking screenshots, finding the link of those adverts, and putting that all together in the case that you make to your landlord, and then that's also potentially useful once if your landlord decides then to issue a Section 13 notice, and you wish to challenge that at a tribunal, you can submit that as evidence. And then somebody else has asked about what makes a Section 13 notice legal. So if the landlord has given you less than 1 month's notice, and if the proposed start date for the new rent doesn't match up with the first day of the period of your tenancy, then that can invalidate it. So I will find, Shelter has a really good page on this, so I can share that link as well. I'm hoping that's covered most of the questions. We will double check if we have missed any questions. There has been one. One is there a time limit for taking an ex-landlord to court? I think that might be something that comes up in a future session. And about deposits, yes, so will be. There is a moving home session on Friday, so anything deposit dispute related will be covered in that. I will make sure that we cover all questions in the email that comes back. But just to wrap things up, I'd like to say thanks to Bez and to Lil for their excellent presentations, and I hope it's been valuable to everyone watching. Thank you for attending as well. It's really, we're doing this because so many renters don't understand their rights. It's a massively complicated area, and I keep learning more about it, and I've been working in this for years. I think we've got some links that we can show. Basically, if you're interested, if you're new to Generation Rent or you're interested in finding out more. So we've got a few things you can do if you're not signed up already. We have generationrent.org/sign_up, and that will put you on our mailing list, so we can keep you up to date with anything new on the renters' rights front or our campaigns. We're always after an understanding of what issues are renters, and Vent Your Rent is our main site for that. If you we're basically mapping renters' experiences around the country on Vent Your Rent, Vent Your.rent. But if you have an experience that you don't want to share, you can also email us on info@generationrent.org. We also have a renters panel, and this is essentially renters from all over the country testing out ideas and initiatives and policies that we think, well, we want to know whether things are going to benefit renters, or it's a way of understanding what needs to change in the rental market to improve life for anyone who depends on it. You can help us campaign online by volunteering. The link to sign up as a volunteer is there, and then also we're a not-for-profit organisation. We depend on other people giving us their money. Many renters won't be able to afford it, but if you can, please donate on generationrent.org/donate. So that's it. Thank you very much for joining us, and I hope you'll enjoy the next events we've got. Tomorrow we have a whole session on Vent Your Rent, just hearing renters' experiences and getting a sense of what the big issues are of the day, and that's happening tomorrow at the same time. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.